I'm about to make a confession that might strike you as strange. Life seldom follows the paths we expect it to tread. Instead, it's a jumble of contradictions, emotions, and complexities that often clash with society's norms. My story, like many others, began innocently enough. At its core, it revolves around my son, Daniel, a vibrant 19-year-old. What I'm about to share may seem confusing, even unsettling, but life is rarely straightforward. It's an intricate tapestry woven from unexpected experiences. My story is no different, as it quietly alters destinies. At the heart of it all is my son, Daniel, a spirited young man brimming with energy, passion, and an insatiable thirst for knowledge. He was my pride and joy, the apple of my eye. Our relationship, warm and uncomplicated, thrived in the familiar rhythm of family life. I cherished my role as his mother, content to live a quiet life in our modest home on the outskirts of town. Surrounded by lush greenery and serenaded by the sweet songs of birds, it should have been the perfect backdrop for an ordinary life. Yet, behind those walls, an unexpected transformation was unfolding. Society's ideas of what is acceptable began to change, and Daniel found himself right at the heart of it all. He had always been a steady presence in my life, someone I could count on at family gatherings, to uplift my spirits during celebrations, and to share in the everyday joys and trials. I viewed him as my son, an intelligent, curious kid with a bright future. I'd never considered him as anything more. To me, he was that little boy who once clutched my hand, his eyes wide with wonder, filled with so many questions about the world. Our bond was typical of mother and son, yet things started to shift subtly, like a whisper in the wind or a subtle change in our reality. The transformation became apparent when Daniel returned home from college for the holidays. There was something undeniably different about him. It wasn't just that he spoke more eloquently or moved with a newfound confidence. He exuded a maturity and self-assurance that caught me off guard. I vividly recall that day. Daniel walked through the front door, and the energy in the room shifted. He seemed remarkably composed, far removed from the boy I had waved goodbye to just months before. For reasons I couldn't quite grasp, that stirred something profound within me. Daniel entered, and his presence flooded the space with an unexpected intensity. His warm smile was familiar, yet there was an unspoken depth in his eyes, a quiet intensity that caught me off guard and made my heart flutter. It was something I couldn't easily explain, but in that split second, a profound shift occurred within me. I could hardly ignore it. What was once a simple mother-son bond felt complicated, like a tantalizing hint of something forbidden. As Daniel sat at the kitchen table, reviewing his notes for exams, I moved about the house with chores, distracted yet aware. While washing dishes, I suddenly felt an unfamiliar tightness in my chest, a sensation I couldn't quite name. Then, unexpectedly, Daniel's gaze landed on me. It was intense, unyielding, and so far removed from the boy I'd raised. I froze, my hand still dripping from the soapy water as a wave of nervousness washed over me. "Hey, how have you been?" I managed to ask, keeping my voice casual despite the unease brewing inside me as I looked his way. "Fine," he replied, his tone hesitant as if he were searching for the right words. There was a pause, thick with unspoken tension. "But there's something I've been thinking about." His words hung in the air, strange and unresolved, sending a knot twisting in my stomach, a primal warning of something I felt but couldn't articulate. Something profound flickered in his gaze, an unfamiliarity that left me unsettled. I couldn't help but wonder, how should I navigate this? In my best maternal tone, I did my utmost to keep my composure. The tension in the air was undeniable, thick enough to cut through. He looked directly into my eyes, and for just a fleeting moment, I caught a glimpse of something, a flicker of longing and vulnerability. "How should I handle this?" I asked, striving to maintain that steady, nurturing tone I always used. Yet I couldn't ignore the palpable shift between us. This was different. It reminded me so vividly of when he was younger, crawling into my arms after a nightmare, desperately seeking comfort and safety. But this time it wasn't fear. It was something infinitely more complicated and dangerous. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said quickly, as if those words had been trapped on his lips for far too long. The impact of his confession felt like a punch to my gut, leaving me stunned and motionless. My breath caught, my heart raced, and my mind swirled as I grappled with the gravity of what I had just heard. What was he really saying? What did it all mean? "Daniel," I began, but the words caught in my throat. A flood of emotions crashed over me, overwhelming my thoughts. I wanted to plead with him. "No, don't." But my mind was spiraling, trapped in a whirlwind of contradictions. Yet, deep in my core, I understood exactly what he meant. The atmosphere shifted. It grew thick and electric. Daniel rose from his chair and moved towards me without saying a word. His footsteps were barely a whisper against the soft carpet, yet they echoed loudly in my heart. Our eyes locked, and the intensity between us was enough to hold me captive. I didn't have time to process what was happening. He leaned down and kissed me. The kiss was brief, almost hesitant, as if he were testing uncharted waters. But the emotions behind it were undeniable, wrapping around me like a wave. I was taken aback, struggling to breathe while every fiber of my being screamed to push him away and re-establish the boundaries that had just been crossed. Yet, I stood frozen, my mind reeling, grappling with the shock. When we finally pulled apart, a heavy silence fell between us. I felt stunned, as though my whole world had just tilted on its axis, and I struggled to collect my thoughts. My heart raced, pounding wildly against my ribs. Daniel seemed just as bewildered, unsure of what to do or say next. I searched his eyes, hoping to catch a hint of remorse, but all I found was a fierce determination. It felt like my reality was fading into a blur, and my heart thudded incessantly. Confusion enveloped me. We had crossed a line, a precarious line that had no business being blurred. The look we shared asked, "What just happened?" There was an undeniable spark between us, dangerous and exhilarating. Neither of us wanted to acknowledge it, yet deep down, we couldn't shake off the thrill of that stolen moment. The days that followed were rough, filled with an uncomfortable tension. Daniel and I danced around the elephant in the room, avoiding each other while unspoken words hung heavily in the air. Guilt and shame wrapped around me, but beneath it all lay a thrilling rush of excitement about what had just transpired. Every accidental brush of skin and hesitant glance sent waves of nervousness through us. It was during one of those quiet afternoons that we found ourselves in the living room, the ticking of the grandfather clock the only sound breaking the silence. Finally, Daniel spoke up, laying bare his feelings about the kiss. His voice trembled with raw emotion, eyes averted, cheeks flushed in a way that mirrored my own. "I don't understand," he admitted, his vulnerability hanging in the air like a fragile thread. We sat together, steeped in silence but electrified by that moment. I could no longer deny what I felt. Daniel's words struck a chord deep within me, awakening emotions I hadn't even realized had been lying dormant. There was a spark of youthful energy radiating from him, a longing for something more than the comfort of my ordinary life. It wasn't merely the kiss. It was the way he looked at me that made me feel desired and cherished. That feeling had long been forgotten, but the stark reality of our situation served as a painful reminder. His genuine admiration rekindled a spark within me, a yearning for something that exceeded the predictable comfort of my life. It wasn't just the kiss. It was how he saw me, how he made me feel valued and cherished. I had lost touch with that feeling, but now the reality we faced was an impossible burden. This wasn't solely about us. It involved the intricate web of relationships and responsibilities that tethered us. It was about betraying the trust of those we loved and jeopardizing everything we held dear. "Daniel," I finally spoke, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "What happened? This can't go on." I told him as firmly as I could, though I felt anything but strong. Confusion churned within me, emotions clashing violently with logic and morality. Daniel's expression darkened with a mixture of pain and determination. "Why not?" he asked quietly, his voice trembling. "I know you feel something for me. I've seen it in your eyes." His words struck me like a punch. For a moment, I was left speechless. He was right, and that truth cut deeper than I could have imagined. I did feel something. I knew I shouldn't, but just because I felt something didn't mean it was wrong. In a low voice, he reiterated, "I know you feel something for me. I've seen it in your eyes." His words knocked the breath out of me momentarily. He was correct. I felt something I shouldn't have. But just because I felt it didn't make it right. From that moment on, our relationship teetered on the edge. I reminded myself over and over that this had to stop. I needed to establish a firm boundary and stick to it. Yet every time I saw him, something deep inside stirred, a part of me I had long forgotten. It wasn't merely his words or even the way he looked at me. It was how he made me feel, alive, desired, and recognized in a way that I had never experienced before. I loathed myself for it, yet the attraction only intensified with each passing day. Things reached a breaking point one evening as Daniel and I sat on the couch watching a movie, though neither of us paid any attention to the screen. I could feel his gaze on me, the air between us thick with unspoken tension. The silence was deafening, and guilt washed over me as I whispered to myself, "What are we doing?" "I don't know," Daniel responded softly but firmly. "But I don't want to stop," I admitted, my heart racing. Deep within, I understood that if I didn't put an end to this now, I never would. This was my last chance to step back and do what was right. Yet when I gazed into his eyes, I sensed the same entrapment he felt. I saw the turmoil reflected back, the same pull that drew us together. I recognized that what we were about to do was wrong, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that it was inevitable. As I inched closer to him, or perhaps he moved toward me, the lines blurred in that moment. All I knew was that every barrier I had constructed, every wall I had built, came crashing down. This time, I kissed him fully aware of every consequence. It wasn't an impulsive action or a fleeting moment of weakness. It was deliberate, weighted with the love, guilt, and confusion I had carried for weeks. The kiss was long and profound, a fusion of emotions that had been building and colliding in an intimate exchange neither of us had ever experienced before. He was an inexperienced young man, and I could sense the hesitance in his touch. There was a nervous energy simmering just beneath the surface, creating a tension that felt heavy in the air. In that moment, it seemed as if our souls had intertwined in a way that defied reason and morality. When we finally pulled apart, it felt like an eternity had passed. Rather than a sense of freedom, I was engulfed by a feeling of being trapped. The realization struck me hard. We had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I had allowed us to step into a realm where turning back was no longer an option, and the weight of that choice settled over me like a heavy shroud. The next morning, I woke up with a profound emptiness deep inside me. Daniel lay beside me, his gaze soft yet troubled. A mix of love and guilt danced in his eyes, mirroring the turmoil in my own heart. I knew with absolute clarity that what had occurred the night before could not happen again, no matter how desperately I wanted to be with him, no matter how strong the pull toward him felt. This situation wasn't fair, not to him and certainly not to me. In that moment, I made the most difficult decision of my life. I got out of bed and turned to him. His eyes met mine with a flicker of hope. "This has to end," I said, my voice steady despite the ache gnawing at my chest. "We can't go on like this." Daniel's face fell, his brow furrowing as he searched for words to argue, but I gently interrupted him. "Daniel, I love you and care for you deeply, but this isn't right. It's not fair to either of us." Tears welled in my eyes as I looked away, knowing that if I lingered in that moment any longer, I might falter. With trembling hands and a shattered heart, I walked away. It was the most painful decision I had ever made, but I was convinced it was the only right one. No matter how much I yearned for him, there were boundaries I simply could not cross. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of loneliness and regret. I threw myself back into my routine, grasping desperately at the things that once provided me with some semblance of stability. Yet everything felt different now. It was empty and hollow. Each day, I attempted to rebuild the walls I had so recklessly torn down, fearing they would never stand as firmly as they once did. The rhythm of my life returned to the usual flow of work, mundane errands, and the little rituals that used to give me peace. But a gaping hole remained in my heart, a constant reminder of the forbidden encounter that had rocked my world. Daniel's absence hung heavily in the air, even though we didn't speak of it. The silence between us illustrated how things had irrevocably changed. I had resumed my routine, but I couldn't shake the unsettling sensation that something was off. Each night, I was haunted by dreams of Daniel, his intense gaze, the raw honesty in his voice, while memories of that earth-shattering night replayed in my mind. I wrestled with the notion of whether I had made the right choice, aware that emotions often clashed with logic. I questioned how long I could continue to suppress my feelings for him. In the quiet moments, there was an unspoken understanding that this was the only path, and despite the agony in my heart, every shared glance and fleeting touch now carried the weight of our secret. His absence presented countless questions. Was it truly possible to do the right thing when emotions defied all logic? How long could a heart endure the suppression of its yearnings before it shattered into countless pieces? I clung to the mantra that I had made the right choice, that walking away was the only way to preserve the fragile balance of our lives. Yet, every night as I drifted off to sleep, his image continued to haunt my dreams, clear as day, keeping the ache alive within me. Every night, I found myself waking up, his image still vivid in my dreams. I couldn't shake the haunting memories of his eyes, his voice, and the warmth of our earth together. The scent of his cologne, a captivating blend of cedar wood and spice, snaked through my thoughts, comforting yet painful. I tried to move on, but deep down, I realized I was still tied to him, unable to let go. Days turned into a blur, and I felt as though I was slowly losing him. That shattering kiss played on an endless loop in my mind, both bittersweet and tormenting. The scent of his cologne clung to my memories like a phantom, always there to comfort and torture me. No matter how hard I tried, a piece of me remained tethered to him, as if an invisible thread connected our souls. Days bled into weeks, and weeks faded into months. 3 months passed in a fog of routine and yearning. It felt like an unrelenting tug-of-war between my head and my heart. The uncertainty of never seeing him again was a constant, aching presence. The distance, while necessary, felt like a gaping wound on my spirit. I clung to the fragile hope that, in time, we would heal the invisible scars we both carried. I reassured myself that we would each find a way to rebuild our lives and seek solace on our separate paths, even as the echoes of our shared moments lingered forever. But it seemed as if fate had a different plan. One crisp autumn afternoon, while I navigated the crowded aisles of the supermarket, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I stopped in my tracks, heart racing. It was a message from Daniel. A wave of emotions crashed over me. Shock, disbelief, a flicker of hope, and a deep-seated fear of what this message might mean. The world around me faded into a blur as I stared at his name. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird trying to escape. I felt a cold chill run through me as I focused on my phone. It had been weeks since I'd last heard from him. I tried to stay strong, convincing myself that the silence was a blessing. Yet here it was. A single notification suddenly made it impossible to deny the truth. "Mom, can we meet? I need to talk to you." My heart raced even faster, conflicting emotions swirling within me. I was confused about how to move forward, but I knew I couldn't keep running from this invitation. We had to find some answers. After a moment of hesitation, I replied, agreeing to meet him. Part of me recognized the danger of reopening this chapter, but I just couldn't bring myself to leave it closed. We chose a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, far from the hustle and bustle of the city center. When Daniel walked in, my breath caught in my throat. He had changed. He looked thinner, his face sharper, and his demeanor was more serious. There was a newfound maturity about him that hadn't been there before, as if the weeks apart had aged him in ways I couldn't quite grasp. We sat across from each other, the silence that settled heavily between us pregnant with unspoken words and emotions. "Thank you for coming." Daniel finally broke the silence, his voice soft yet steady. "I needed to see you." I nodded, my own voice betraying a hint of uncertainty as I replied, "I needed to see you too." The words felt strangely foreign on my tongue, and I couldn't tell if I spoke out of politeness, habit, or a deeper truth I was afraid to face. Daniel took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he clasped them together on the table. Whatever he was about to say required every ounce of his strength. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he began, his eyes locking onto mine. He paused, his gaze flickering with a blend of pain and resolve. "While it hurts me, I know you were right." His voice grew firmer as he continued. "This wasn't right. It couldn't be." I felt my chest tighten at his words, even as I nodded in agreement. But he pressed on, his tone steadying. "I also know that what I felt for you wasn't a mistake. His eyes brimmed with determination and sincerity, holding my gaze captive, leaving me unable to look away. "I can't deny the profound connection we share," Daniel confessed, his voice echoing with a heartfelt sincerity that sent shivers down my spine. Yet I recognized the truth in his next words. What we had couldn't continue. My hands trembled as I absorbed his message, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. I had braced myself for another familiar battle, one I thought would mirror our past arguments. But this felt different. This was a quiet surrender. "Daniel," I hesitated, wanting to say something, but he gently interrupted me. "Please let me finish," he said, his voice calm and steady, contrasting sharply with the storm of emotions churning inside me. "What we experienced was real, and I can't deny it. But it can't be our future. You deserve a love that isn't intertwined with shadows and secrets." He paused, locking eyes with me again. "We're family, Lily. We can't build a life on a foundation of confusion and misplaced feelings." His words struck me like a bolt of lightning. They hung heavily in the air, sharp and resolute. I was taken aback. This wasn't the impulsive young man who had stolen my first kiss months ago, swept away by a whirlwind of desire and unspoken longing. This was a man who had grappled with his conscience, one who had matured through the painful process of self-reflection. While I felt a bittersweet pride in his newfound clarity, a wave of sadness washed over me at the thought of our relationship coming to an end. This was truly it. We spent some time together, talking about his university life, my work projects, and the everyday things that filled our lives. But both of us knew we were ready to move on, to heal and embrace a future unburdened by the weight of our past. We talked for a while, and eventually we hugged. It wasn't just a goodbye. It marked the closing of a chapter and a recognition of the somber end of our love story. During the drive home, I grappled with a torrent of emotions: relief, sadness, and lingering regret. I had loved Daniel, our bond forged in secrecy and longing. But when the moment came to say goodbye, there was nothing left to say. We parted, not simply to close the book but to acknowledge the bittersweet ending of our forbidden tale. As I drove, each mile felt heavier with the weight of emotions. I loved Daniel with a fierce intensity born of secret desires and shared vulnerabilities. Yet deep down, I knew our story would forever live in the echoes of memories. This wasn't a fairy tale with a happy ending. Rather, it was a messy, complicated truth, a testament to the complexities of human emotions and the enduring power of love in all its unconventional forms. With an intensity that defied explanation, our love had thrived in the shadows. But I understood now that love, even in its purest form, isn't always the answer. Sometimes, doing what's right means letting go of what we crave the most. It's not that the feelings weren't real, they simply weren't meant to be for that time or those circumstances. Daniel and I had crossed boundaries, venturing into forbidden territory. Neither of us regretted the powerful emotions we'd shared, yet we both recognized that boundaries exist for a reason. Love doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes, it means learning to let go. Leave a like and subscribe for more real and honest stories about love, infidelity, and the complicated world of human relationships.